celebrate our anniversary, my wife and I booked an Airbnb for the weekend. A cabin on the lake. "Looks like it's about to rain," Amber said as she rolled her suitcase across the porch. I looked up. To the west, the sky was deep grey. Thick storm clouds heading towards us at a steady pace. "Just our luck," I grumbled, hauling my suitcase out of the trunk. After we'd gotten everything inside, we poured wine and sat by the picture window overlooking the lake. The sky was darker now, and the glassy stillness of the water reflected the deep grey of the sky. The pine trees surrounding the lake swayed in the wind. "Wait, look," Amber said. "There's someone out there." At first, I didn't see what she was talking about. But then, as I squinted, I did. In the middle of the lake, there was a tiny peach-coloured blob bobbing up and down. Someone was out there, and they were waving their arms around as if signalling for help. "Oh God, are they drowning?" Amber asked, rushing over to the window. You call the police," I said, getting up and grabbing my jacket. "I'll take the rowboat out and try to help." The Airbnb had advertised a small rowboat that we could use. I could be out in the middle of the lake in under 5 minutes. Given how far we were out from town, it would probably take the police 20 minutes to get here. Amber looked at me, as if she were about to say something, but then she just nodded. I zipped up my coat and ran outside. The rain had started. A light drizzle blurred the lake in front of me, wetting my face. I ran down to the docks and undid the knot, then stepped into the boat. It rocked violently underneath me as I sat down and pushed off with the oars. I rowed furiously towards the centre of the lake, keeping my eyes on the person. But they were a lot farther out than I had anticipated. Even after rowing 5 minutes, my arm muscles were burning, and I was only slightly closer. I stopped for a second and cupped my hands around my mouth. "Hey, I'm coming to help. Hang in there." They didn't respond, just kept waving their arms over their head. Probably can't hear me, I thought. Sucking in a deep breath, I began to row faster. The rain was harder now. Thick raindrops hit the wood of my boat with a tap, tap, tap. Water dripped down from my hair and into my eyes. I shook my head to get it off, not breaking stroke, and continued rowing towards the centre of the lake. The person was finally a little closer now. I could see them bobbing up and down on the surface of the lake through the pelting rain, waving their arms furiously above their head. It looked like it was possibly a woman with dark hair, but I couldn't be certain. The oars sloshed through the lake. I was panting and my arms ached, but I forced myself to continue forward. They weren't that far off now. In just a few minutes, I'd be close enough to yell out to them, to see them clearly. The sky flashed white. Seconds later, the rumble of thunder, so loud I could feel it in my bones. I swallowed. This isn't safe. I glanced back at the cabin. It was so far away now, I could see the tiny brown blob that was Amber, standing on the docks, waiting for me to return. Maybe we should have just waited for the police. What if I get struck by lightning? I swallowed and turned back to the woman, paddled as fast as I could with all my might. The rain pelted down furiously, running down my face, pooling in the bottom of the boat. The peach-coloured blob grew closer and closer, and then I could see her clearly for the first time. Every muscle in my body froze, because as she bobbed in the water, waving her hands above her head, she was smiling. Not just smiling, grinning from ear to ear as she stared at my boat approaching. Instinctively, I grabbed the oars and backpedaled. The water resisted me, kicking up in loud splashes, and then the boat began to slide away from her. I grabbed the cell phone out of my pocket. It was Amber. "Drew," she breathed, her voice wavering on the other end of the line. "The police, they said, whatever you do, don't go out into the lake." "What?" "Some psycho's been swimming out in the middle of the lake, luring people out. Just leave her there. Come back." She continued talking, but I didn't hear what she said, because the woman had disappeared. The phone fell out of my hands. I grabbed the oars and pulled them towards me, rowing backwards towards the shore as fast as I possibly could. I stared into the water, looking for a ripple, a shadow, anything, but it was impossible. With the rain hitting the surface, the reflections of the storm clouds, there was no way I could tell where she was. I rowed faster, my heart pounding in my chest. Glancing over my shoulder, I could see that the dock was still so far away. Amber began waving to me frantically. The sky, the lake, the pine trees at the shore lit up. A peal of thunder rang in my ears. I rowed faster, and then I heard it. A tap, tap, tap from the bottom of my boat. I didn't have time to react before the boat flipped over and I plunged into the ice-cold water. I broke the surface and gasped for air, screaming as I grabbed the side of the boat. Something grabbed my ankle and tugged. I plunged back into the water. I struggled to pull myself up, but the iron grip on my ankle wouldn't loosen. I kicked and thrashed, trying to pull myself towards the shadow of the boat above me. And then the grip released. I broke the surface, gasping. Then I clawed at the boat, desperately righting it. After a few attempts, I was finally able to get myself back inside. I turned it around and rowed as fast as I possibly could, never looking back. Miraculously, the woman didn't follow me. I scrambled up on the dock and Amber hugged me, crying. The police arrived soon after and searched the lake for the woman, but they came up empty-handed. Needless to say, Amber and I cut our trip short. We packed our bags and started the drive home just after the sun had set. As we pulled out of the driveway, in the darkness, I swear I saw a light winking at us from the middle of the lake, as if someone was trapped out there, signaling for help. I can't tell you exactly what we had been doing that night, but I know that we ended up sitting around a bonfire at Ocean Beach, huddled together, sharing blankets and passing a bottle of cheap Russian vodka between shivering hands. That period of my life is a blur of dark nights and big feelings. 13 years old and tasting some kind of independence for the first time. I basked in my actualized pre-teen fantasies as if they were the heat from the dancing flames before my very eyes. As a younger sibling with an inferiority complex, I had always craved the romanticized, formless concept of being older. I did everything in my power to push impatiently past childhood until finally, in the 8th grade, some older friends invited me to go out with them on a Friday night. That night didn't so much change my life as it presented me with the life that I always knew was waiting for me. Lying to parents, drinking liquor and smoking cigarettes, going to punk shows, casual hookups between friends, stick and poke tattoos, tagging, stealing, singing, no, screaming lyrics into the night. Our words painted the stars on the black sky above as we laughed and cried and tripped over each other up and down the streets of the city that had become our playground. San Francisco in the early 2000s. No one will tell you that this wasn't a special time and place, especially for kids whose parents weren't paying attention. The nights meshed together into a singular experience that was adolescence, characterized more by a feeling than a singular event. So when I say I can't tell you exactly what we had been doing that night, understand that it's because it was just like any other night. There were 5 or 6 of us, and we had ended up around a bonfire at Ocean Beach, our bare feet digging into the cold sand. It was Anya who offered the dare. "I bet you won't go skinny dipping," she glared across the fire at Oscar. Oscar glared back as the flames cast dancing shadows over his sharp features. A slow smile spread across his face, and without a word, he wriggled out of his jacket, pulled his hoodie and t-shirt over his head, dropped his pants and underwear, and ran towards the water, dancing and twirling into the darkness. Now, I feel like I have to pause and say this wasn't strange behaviour. Oscar pretty much got naked at any opportunity and with no apparent regard for modesty or cold. I remember the first time he did it. We had snuck into Lincoln Park Golf Course, and after slipping away for a moment, he streaked by us, prancing and yipping like he'd just been let out of a laboratory and was touching grass for the first time. This was how Oscar lived. He attended School of Arts with a concentration in dance, but he also played music, made paintings, and never hesitated to tell us how much he loved us. How these were the days of our lives. Just how real all of this was. He dubbed mixtapes for us from an old cassette player and wrote little songs about his friends. Oscar's parents were Russian immigrants who were hard-working and seemingly neglectful. It had been made clear the couple of times that I visited his house that he had even less of a parental presence than the rest of us. Maybe this was why he was so tender with his friends. Maybe we were the closest family he'd ever had. Moments later, Oscar came running out of the darkness, still naked and still prancing, but completely dry. "Oh, what's wrong, Oski? Water too cold?" Anya pouted her lips and batted her eyelashes in a mock display of sympathy. Unfazed, Oscar pushed a flop of blonde hair out of his eyes. "The water is beautiful," he said. "I just don't want to go in alone." His eyes scanned the circle and locked on mine. He gave me a stupid, toothy grin and said, "I want Stevie to come in with me." I was the youngest in the group, and they got a kick out of making me squirm. It didn't help that my cheeks flushed red every time they pushed me to do something that I wasn't comfortable with. I felt my face get hot. "No, I don't think so," I started to say, my eyes darting down to the sand. Anya leaned forward and gently held my face in her hands. "Look at him. Oh my God, Oscar, you're going to make him cry." No, My eyes met hers and my mind went blank. Big, brown, caked in mascara and shimmering in the light of the fire. In that moment, she was everything I had ever wanted. I'll do it. Yay! Anya squealed with delight. I pushed myself to my feet, heart pounding in my tightened chest, and took my clothes off. Oscar grabbed my hand and smiled. I'll never forget the look in his eyes. It was the look not only of a grateful friend, but one of a proud father. A look that carried warmth and acceptance. For a moment, I couldn't feel the icy wind or the eyes on my naked body. All I could feel was love. And the next thing I knew, we were running down the beach towards the surf, shrieking with laughter. But with each step forward, I became more aware of the ocean ahead. The vast freezing ocean. I could suddenly hear the waves crashing and the wind screaming in my ears. My heart pounded up into my head and my breaths got shorter. And when my feet hit that sharp, biting water, I froze. Oscar kept running though, and I could only watch as he splashed and danced before me. Alone, getting smaller and smaller, until he disappeared under the black water, and all that was left was the moon. They didn't find Oscar's body for 2 days. I remember watching his parents at the funeral, his mother weeping silently, and his father sitting stone-faced, staring straight ahead, not betraying any emotion. Needless to say, things changed after that. It was the beginning of the end for many of us. Anya took Oscar's death the hardest, moving on to harder drugs, and eventually fading away as just another warped memory. I think she blamed herself. It was her dare after all. But deep down, I always knew the truth. I was the one who had frozen. I was the one who let him go in alone. I was the one who abandoned him. And I was the one who watched him die. I spent most of the following year at home alone. I withdrew from my family, not that they tried to help much. They were happy enough to believe I was fine, but I wasn't. I couldn't sleep without the TV on, because as soon as I was alone in the dark with nothing but my thoughts, all I could see was Oscar's face. That look in his eyes, my last memory of him. It made me sick with guilt. He trusted me, and he loved me, and I let him down. And now, he was dead. It wasn't long after that the nightmares began. I remember the first time it happened. I was lying awake in my bed. I was sure I was awake when I became aware of a faint clicking sound. My body tensed and became frozen. The clicking got louder and closer as the features of my room fell away and the familiar shadows melted into a black, formless void around my bed. There he was, standing before me, pale and dripping wet, hair matted to his forehead, long, skinny arms wrapped around his shivering naked body. His face looked scared and confused, almost panicked, but his eyes were no longer the soft, curious baby blue that had once brought me so much comfort. They were a dead milky white and sunken back into his head, staring directly into mine. "K-k-k," whispered through his violently chattering teeth. "Cold. I'm so cold. Stevie, help me. I'm so cold. Please, help me." I tried to scream, but only choked. I was helplessly paralyzed as he stood at the foot of my bed in bewildered despair, desperate, shivering, begging me for help. Gradually, his face started to change. His confusion and fear slowly transformed, as if he was remembering something. How could you leave me? How? You were my friend. Oscar's expression turned to hurt, to disbelief. You left me. You. He paused. For a moment, there was silence. You left me, he screamed, and shot forward onto my bed, crawling towards me, chattering teeth louder and louder as he clawed forward, until they were like jackhammers pounding in my chest. You left me. You left me. You left me. He was on top of me as I laid completely immobilized, face inches from mine, crawling with spidery purple veins and soaking my bed as ice-cold water dripped from his twisted, writhing body, choking me with the smell of brine. How could you leave me? And then he was gone. My room was back. I jumped out of bed to turn the lights on. I could still smell salt water in the air. But I was alone. These nightmares continued for years. They were always the same. First, the chattering of teeth and the smell of seawater would signify a visit. The room would fall away into blackness, and there he was, shivering at the foot of my bed. Pleas for help, confusion, desperation, then a slow realization, betrayal, hurt, and finally rage. I stopped sleeping, stopped turning my lights off, kept my door open, and sometimes I would go weeks or even months without seeing him. But inevitably, the nightmares would return. The first time I told anyone about this was in college. Half a decade of poor sleep had fried my nerves, and I ended up visiting the university's mental health counselor for support. He was the first person to tell me about sleep paralysis. Apparently, it's a fairly common phenomenon. The sufferer will be awake, but they won't be able to move. This is because their body has entered REM sleep and their muscles have shut off before their brain has, causing mental consciousness with physical paralysis. Oftentimes these episodes are accompanied by a feeling of panic or dread, and strangely, it's not uncommon for people with sleep paralysis to see what they believe to be a dark figure or malevolent presence above them. The technical term for this is hypnagogic hallucination. That, in conjunction with PTSD and survivor's guilt of watching my friend drown in front of me, led to my specific reoccurring experience of this condition. With medication and dedicated therapy, he said, we would be able to treat the symptoms while addressing the underlying causes. And it worked. Gradually, I got better. I started taking meds, and finally, for the first time, opening up about what had happened and how it affected me. I was able to let go and forgive my 13-year-old self for my inaction that night, and most importantly, I began to sleep. Life went on. I graduated college, found a career, and met a girl, Cindy. She balanced out my restlessness and overthinking with a soft tranquility. She was nothing like me, and it was exactly what I needed. I lived quietly and happily. One weekend, Cindy had to leave town to visit family and asked if I could watch her dog while she was away. She had her own apartment in the outer sunset. A quiet weekend alone sounded nice. It was already past 10 when I took her dog out for his walk that night. I had a windbreaker over a hoodie, but the wind was strong, and I was chilled through as soon as we stepped out onto the street. We walked down Noriega and past Great Highway, and before I knew it, we were at Ocean Beach. It hadn't even crossed my mind, but I hadn't set foot on that sand in over 10 years, since the night Oscar died. And here I was, descending the concrete steps past the sea wall, moving almost automatically into the darkness. The waves turned over in the distance, and the moon hung low in the sky, faint behind the grey mist above the water. I stared out at that lonely moon and felt comfort, proud of how far I'd come. I was snapped out of my head when Cindy's dog suddenly bolted, barking into the darkness. "Shit," I muttered, and took off after him, calling his name. I ran as fast as I could, following the sound of his barks as they moved towards the water ahead of me. As I approached the surf, the smell of salt water hit me and I froze. There he was, standing before me, knee-deep in black water, pale and dripping wet, hair matted to his forehead, long skinny arms wrapped around his shivering naked body, teeth chattering, eyes white. My body locked up and I couldn't move, paralyzed again. The beach fell away into the blackness. The dog's bark trailed off into silence. All I could hear was that awful clicking sound of Oscar's chattering teeth as they gnashed together behind his blue lips. He walked towards me, trembling, milky eyes locked on mine, approached me, stood face to face, leaned over, and whispered in my ear, "You left me." Next thing I knew, I was thrashing wildly in the icy waves, gasping for breath, fighting with bewildered desperation to keep my head above water. But something was pulling me under, down into the inky murk. I swallowed and gagged on seawater as I tried to scream and fight for air, but the water was so cold. I felt my arteries constrict and my lungs tighten up, and everything was black and violent and bewildering. I felt thin fingers on my throat squeezing tighter and tighter until I finally broke free and found the sand under my feet. I clawed through the sea away from the moon and towards the land until finally, I collapsed panting on the beach, Cindy's dog crying and licking the salt from my face and the blood from my neck. I winced in pain as I felt the pulsating scratches, and I looked back towards the deserted surf, calm and lonely and beautiful. My job as a scuba diver was pretty amazing. I adored the sea. It was a place of mystery and relaxation, which fascinated me to no end. I was a part of a diving team called Scubs, and we collected sea life specimens for the local research facility. Life was good. I did this for a living and couldn't really ask for a job that suited me more. However, my love for the sea was challenged one day, the day I went into the cave. The cave was a hot topic amongst our diving team. We would go into deep caves regularly, even very dangerous ones. But this one was a dread zone, even for us experienced divers, due to it being an underwater maze which was extremely difficult to navigate. The cave had not been properly secured yet, as most divers were too scared to venture in. The air was breathable above the maze-like stone walls, trapped in by a ceiling of rock. You could climb up to get on top of the walls to save air on the BA kits if anything went wrong. From the top of the walls, you could see the dark passageways of water and stone that were poking out. According to a few of the divers, a team of specialists ventured in once, but they didn't find their way out for hours. The only way they found their way back was by climbing up onto the stone walls and navigating their way out from there. I still have flashbacks to the day I went down there. It's something I wish I could forget. I was a confident, bordering on cocky, diver at that point. Deep-sea diving was just another day at the office for me, and I had grown accustomed to the dark blue depths of the alien SeaWorld. I was aware of the dangers, and I wasn't too reckless. We were all repeatedly told that if a spot begins to get too tight, you get out. Quick. An admin member of Bluefin's research facility called me and asked me if I would be willing to go down to the cave. The facility was searching for some type of unknown vertebrae that was rumoured to be down there from the previous team. I declined the offer, of course, and stated that I'd only go down with my team alongside me, as well as some sort of monetary incentive. Turns out, after the call, the managers at the facility had messaged the entire team about the job. They stated that we wouldn't be authorized to go down without less than 3 persons. They did give us the option of declining and added to their offer a $500 bonus to those who accepted. I got in touch with Brian, who was the team supervisor for Scubs. He told me that my colleagues May and Leon had accepted the offer, but the rest of the team had politely declined. I needed the money and thought, what the hell, why not? The problem was, May and Leon ended up backing out at the last minute. Therefore, I wouldn't have been authorized to go down. By the time they had declined, I was on my boat headed towards the location that very day. They had tried to call me, but I left my phone in my bag and missed the calls. None of the team ended up showing up at the location. I did see another empty boat, which I assumed was May or Leon's. I thought that they had already made their way down as no one was here. I got my diving gear on and jumped into the sea. I knew I should have waited, but that $500 bonus was a real motivator. What I didn't know at the time was that Brian was already rushing to my location to inform me the dive was off. I steadily made my way down from the boat. The water got darker after 10 minutes of swimming downward. I came to an opening in the rocks and went through. I turned on my underwater flashlight and assembled a fishing spear. After about 30 minutes of descending a deep cave, there was an open hole in the stone. I swam through and made my way through a dark passageway. My flashlight revealed the dreaded sign with a picture of the Grim Reaper to the left, which stated, "Stop, prevent your death, go no farther." I remember seeing similar signs to this in previous deep-sea dives. I carried on down through the caves until I came to a second big opening which was almost pitch black. I swam lower and kept my spear close. Halfway down, my ankle scraped off a rock and I felt it bleeding. Luckily, I didn't scrape my wetsuit. "Be careful," I mentally whispered to myself. After I hit the bottom of the cave, I squinted up. I couldn't see much, just dust floating in the torch's revealing light. Out of nowhere, I felt something brush past my leg from behind me. I turned around quickly and frantically looked around, my torch darting around with my gaze. Still, the only thing I could see was the dust. I waited a moment longer, then made my way forward towards a small opening my flashlight had spotted on my descent. Another sign appeared. "Stop, prevent your death, go no farther." I knew what was coming and had prepared myself to climb up onto the stone walls if anything went wrong. I swam through and began making my way down another passageway. I turned around out of instinct and went back. I swam up to the top of the wall, which was just to the side of the entrance where I had come in. I lit a flare and placed it on the cobbles above, which revealed a dim light. It was so dark down here, another light was more than welcome. As I slowly swam forward, the flare light dimmed and my torch took over in the misty dark water. I turned around to make sure it hadn't gone out. As I did, a shadowy mass that had glided past the entrance hole from the other side caught my attention. I thought I was just seeing things. This was such a dark area, and the mind can play tricks. It wasn't too long until I felt lost, but I kept checking the walls at surface level and made sure I could easily climb on them if I needed to. I wasn't worried. I started looking for any sea life to collect and was actually enjoying myself for the most part. I started gathering some smaller marine life in plastic tubes. I didn't really want to stay down here for longer than necessary and started acting with more haste. Then suddenly, it dawned on me. Where are May and Leon? I stopped dead. Are they lost? I had been so immersed in my current adventure that I'd missed the obvious. I turned around and started swimming down a passageway I had come from previously, keeping my eyes peeled for the other two. That's when I saw the large growing shadow. I completely froze as its face loomed out of the darkness and slowly into the light. A huge grin of razor-sharp teeth and black, dead eyes. It was a shark. A big shark. I let out a scream encased in a flurry of bubbles. Everything felt like it was in slow motion. I swam as fast as I could in the opposite direction of the beast and scrambled up onto the top of the walls. I looked down into the dark water to see if I could see it anywhere. It was so dark. All I could hear was my heart pounding in my ears. I was on my hands and knees gripping the stone wall trying to figure out which way I had come in. The flare light had gone out, and my torch was the only source of light in the darkness. 20 minutes had passed, and I thought the shark might have moved on by now. I hoped with every fibre of my being that it had. I started crawling on top of the wall, desperately trying to navigate my way back. I thought I'd found the opening where the wall came to an end. I jumped into the water. Blackness surrounded me as the flashlight went off again. I gripped the torch and shook it violently. The light didn't come back on. A feeling of ice-cold dread flooded my veins. My hands were shaking so much I nearly dropped the torch while scrambling to find the switch. But after a few fearful seconds, it decided to work. I looked behind myself quickly but saw nothing but the torchlight and dust. I turned back around and swam forward. The opening to the cave wasn't where I thought it was. There was just a dark rock staring back at me. I clambered back onto the stone wall. As I was making my way forward on my hands and knees, I mentally mapped out where I had come in, scrambling to figure out the way back in my head. Suddenly, water brushed past my hands. I looked to my right to see the water had been unsettled. I stopped dead and kept my eyes glued to the ripples in the torchlight. I held my breath so tightly. I began moving again, this time keeping my eyes on my hands and the stone in front of me. Another 10 minutes had passed, and I was still searching for the entrance. I heard a tussle from the dark water below. I looked 10 meters in front and slightly left to where I was. A large taunting fin emerged from the dark and then faded into the void. I felt a lightning bolt of panic. I just needed to try and get out of here as quickly as I could. Eventually, I made it to the wall where I thought the cave entrance was. This time, the water was within enough distance to put my head under without getting in fully. I dipped my head in and could see that the entrance was right in front of me. I jumped in and darted a look behind me. I felt like I was being glared at from all angles. I thought to myself, I couldn't go if that beast was stalking me. But I had no choice. There was nothing in my vision, so I swam as fast as I could, back through the caves, and eventually smashing my way through the surface of the sea. I clawed my way onto the boat, huffing with exhaustion and sheer adrenaline. I could see Brian's boat next to mine. He rushed out to the stern after he saw I had returned. He shouted over that the dive had been cancelled due to dropouts, and he asked why I didn't answer my damn phone. I could do nothing but apologize. I felt eternally grateful that I had made it back in one piece, as most probably wouldn't have. I was also relieved that May and Leon weren't down there after all. I'll never go down to those caves on my own again.